A sobering milestone in the battle against the coronavirus now. The United States has the most reported deaths in the world. More than 22,000 people have died. And we have reached more than 500,000 confirmed cases in America. For the first time as well in our nation's history, all 50 states are now under major disaster declarations. Meanwhile, this is happening. President Trump having a reaction to Dr. Anthony Fauci. The president retweeted a message with the hashtag #FireFauci after the nation's top infectious disease expert said more lives could have been saved from COVID-19 if the country had begun lockdowns earlier. Watch.
I mean, obviously, you could logically say that if you had a process that was ongoing and you started mitigation earlier, you could have saved lives. Obviously, no one is going to deny that. But what goes into those kinds of decisions is complicated. If we had, right from the very beginning, shut everything down, it may have been a little bit different. But there was a lot of pushback about shutting things down back then.
And there was also a lot of lack of information at that time, too, something that everybody has now started to wake up to as well. The president is weighing on when to reopen parts of the nation. That's part of our story today. Watch.
I'm going to have to make a decision, and I only hope to God that it's the right decision. But I would say without question, it's the biggest decision I've ever had to make.
However, some health experts and governors have pushed back on a possible May 1st target date. I want to bring in now Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier, also anchor and executive editor of Special Report. Great to see you today. So, there are kind of two headlines that are working out there, Bret, and I want to hit this first one with Dr. Fauci. We talked about it last hour on Outnumbered, and the comment that I made was, how much of this is really helpful? And of course, that's also a question.
Yeah, none, really, in the big picture. And two, we've seen this story about, President Trump doesn't like Fauci. Fauci is criticizing President Trump. It goes up and down and up and down. And if you look at the whole context of that soundbite, Fauci is asked a hypothetical. What if? The U.S. had done a complete lockdown. Well, the problem is that we, to your point, didn't have that information. Fauci himself at the end of January was saying the risk to U.S. citizens was very low in interviews. And the real blame, and there's a lot of stories about the blame to go around, the real blame is on China. Something else Fauci said this weekend, that the original data out of China led them astray as far as how contagious it was and how many cases there were.
Yeah, it's I think that's very informative to tell people, too, that it wasn't just the lack of detail or information coming from other countries dealing with this early on, the first of which was China, but it was also misinformation that we now know from even our own intelligence community.
Right. And, that falls again right on China as far as what was coming out. Now, the TikTok about what happened when with the administration, is illuminating in some points, and clearly other things could have happened. But when the president shut down the travel from China, he rightly points out often that he was criticized for doing that. That bought a lot of time as far as having to deal with this virus. I think there's a lot of things we don't know about the original point in Wuhan. I think there's a lot of things that we don't know as why Shanghai and Beijing did not get as much of this fallout as Milan or New York City. And I think we have a lot of investigating to do.
Yeah, we do. And as a journalist, of course, we'll do that. You know what? I do want to hit this one thing. The New Yorker is featuring Dr. Fauci in an article this month, calling him America's doctor. People from all walks, all, political stripes have said that you need somebody to lead. This is the man that they have said that they trust. Is it damaging that the president tweets something that has a hashtag fire Fauci in it, or do people just kind of calculate it, Fred, as, okay, that's just more stuff on Twitter?
Well, I think the president does a lot of those things that have a lot of even his supporters scratching their heads. I'm sure he'll be asked about retweeting something that says fire Fauci at the task force briefing today. I'm sure he's going to be pressed on that, and I'm sure the answer is going to be, I respect this, I respect him, and I'm going to use the data from Fauci and Birch to make my decision about opening the country. I think the president's inclination is always to defend, because he spent 3 years under attack in his mind from all corners, and that retweet was more about, see, he said it too at the end of January. Right after that, I closed down travel from China.
Yeah, you know, the other thing that's happening today is this New York Times article, and you know, the president doing what he does. He'll spar, he'll fire back, and that's what he's doing today at the New York Times, saying this is over a report accusing him of ignoring his advisor's warnings about COVID-19 and moving too slowly on imposing those social distancing guidelines. However, the president tweeted the New York Times story is a fake. Just like the paper itself, I was criticized for moving too fast when I issued the China ban, long before most others wanted to do so. And Brett, you brought that up as an example of one of the steps that he took. Again, you know, witnessing another public fight. And I just toss to you and almost want to ask, what are they supposed to make of it?
Well, it's just a lot of back and forth, and it'll continue. There is criticism to go around. Clearly, the administration at some points could have done different things. Clearly, there's going to be this, at the end of this, a look back. But I think the majority of sentiment across the country is, we're in the middle of this. Let's get through it. Let's help small businesses and companies survive this. Let's make sure as few people as possible die because of this, and get to the other side and then do the look back. And obviously the president has always been a counterpuncher, and he's going to continue to be.
So, you know what, you brought up an interesting point, though, because he does defend, he does counterpunch. I ask, and I've wanted to ask you this for a long time, so I'm just going to put it out there. When we watch those news conferences in the afternoons and we see people who are journalists like you and I are, Brett, asking the same questions kind of over and over and having those moments of contention, have we moved to a point now where maybe that only works for the president?
Clearly, he thinks it works because he thinks that sparring is good to shore up his supporters. I think that as a journalist sitting there, you want to advance the ball on substance, not get in a fight with the president of the United States. That doesn't mean that you don't ask pointed questions, but you ask them in a way to advance the ball, as you know, Harris. And sometimes because of the contentious nature of it, you're right. He sees it as a plus. A lot of people look at those things and say, this is too long. He could have done it in half the time. And I'm not saying that because it happens in my hour all the time. I'm saying just because his supporters and others say, you know, he could have done the same thing in half the time.
I was just curious. I know that you're there. You are anchoring those moments right after, right before. Oftentimes the president is there. We are all watching those reporters together. And have lived in those shoes similarly in some cases. Okay, I want to get to this, and it's the amount of cash that the RNC has now launched a digital ad campaign, $1 million, praising the president's response to COVID-19. Here's a clip. Watch.
We are working very well with FEMA Region 2 with the Army Corps of Engineers, building 4 field hospitals. That was a decision the president himself took, and I'm grateful for it.
He has been responsive. He's done a lot of good things. He has the Army Corps of Engineers in our state. He's been very helpful and cooperative.
Brett, what's your reaction?
Well, I think you're going to see a lot more of these ads. I think you'll also see ads from the other side, which is Joe Biden's side and the Democrats trying to take pieces of these press conferences and the news coverage of them and make them ads the other way. I think that, you know, Chris Wallace said this last week, but I do think that that this moment, how we recover or don't, both economically and from this medically and physically, will determine the outcome of the race in November. And that's why you'll see a ton of ads like this over the next few weeks. You know, the Trump campaign, Harris, has a boatload of money, $240 million in just this quarter. So they're going to spend it.
Yeah. All right, Bret Baier, I love having the nitty-gritty conversations with you, particularly about journalism. Good to see you, my friend. We'll see you at 6 p.m. Eastern. Thank you.
Thanks, Harris.
The world's top health agency is reporting dozens of vaccines in the works globally to fight the COVID-19 outbreak. And officials are warning the virus could stalk the human race for some time. Dr. Oz joins me with reaction to that and taking viewers' questions. Plus, devastating twisters tore through the South and left at least 20 people dead, hundreds of homes damaged or destroyed. Look at these pictures. We're in the middle of tornado season, and it is on.
To go out a week from today. Back to you.
All right, Edward Lawrence, thank you very much. So what difference will that make when Americans can get their hands on those checks? To Edward Lawrence's point, a lot of them will be dispersed this week, and by Wednesday, quite a few of them. That's an area I want to take up with Nancy Davis. Nancy is the Quadratic Capital Management Chief Investment Officer. Nancy, thank you for joining us. What do you think people are going to do with that money?
Well, we're Americans. We love to spend money. So I think it's just a question of when we can be let out of our house to go buy and make purchases. I don't know about you, Neil, but I feel like I'm using Walmart grocery and Amazon way more than I ever did. And I know I'm jumping out of my chair to be, free and go spend some money. So, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the U.S. economy is resilient. Obviously, this is an unknown time, but we will get through this. And it's just a question of how long it's going to take.
No, I think you're exactly right. And history proves we get through it. Again, it's the time frame that's in question. So let me ask you about that. What do you think it will be? I mean, I know everyone hopes for a V-shaped recovery, just bounce back strongly. I don't know how likely that is if people are afraid to fly, certainly reluctant to hop on a cruise, maybe get in a crowded theater or eating establishment. I think that comes back in time, but it might take some time. So play that out for me. What are you seeing?
To me, it seems like, Goldilocks and the Three Bears right now. And it seems, given the, massive rally that we had last week in equities, it was the biggest rally in 45 years, as Lauren mentioned earlier. It seems like we might be out of the woods right now. But the truth is we've just gone into the bear's cabin, to use that analogy of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And soon we're going to find out if the policy measures, both monetary and fiscal, with the checks being sent, whether it's too much, too little, or if it's just right.
Robert Shiller made some news, the guy who's expert on housing, but much more than that, who said that just the fears around the pandemic could create their own economic freeze. He was talking about the economy slipping into a recession or worse based on just the fear. Do you think that's right? And what would it take for Americans to sort of calm down? I would imagine progress of the virus itself would go a long way, but your own thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only data point that we can possibly look at is before World War I with the Spanish flu. And I think the reality is our economy is wildly different.